Good morning, friends, and welcome to our Sunday morning meeting. This lodge holds a meeting every Sunday at 11 a.m. For the presentation of a special topic by a student. Today is a special day on which we are commemorating the life and work of Mr. Judge. He was a tremendous friend and a great worker for Theosophy. That friendship established at the first moment of meeting HPB lasted through his lifetime. He remained faithful as a chela to his teacher, to the master's program, and basically he held that position in the Americas when HPB went to India with Olcott. Single-handedly he carried that work, so we owe him a tremendous gratitude for the work he has done and establishing Theosophy in the United States. He was an avid and tireless worker and made a tremendous example for all to follow. Today we're going to have 3 readings followed by notes. Then we'll have a 4th reading and closing remarks. The first reading is from H.P. Blavatsky. Harmony in the physical and mathematical world of sense is justice in the spiritual one. Justice produces harmony and injustice discord. Discord on a cosmical scale means chaos and annihilation. If there is a developed immortal spirit in men, it must be in everything else, at least in a latent or germinal state. And it can only be a question of time for each of these germs to become fully developed. There is a way to avoid reincarnation, and Buddha taught it in his doctrine of poverty, restriction of the senses, perfect indifference to the objects of this earthy vale of tears, freedom from passion, and frequent intercommunication with the Atma, soul contemplation. The cause of reincarnation is ignorance of our senses and the idea that there is any reality in the world, anything except abstract existence. From the remotest antiquity, mankind as a whole have always been convinced of the existence of a personal spiritual entity within the personal physical man. This inner entity was more or less divine according to its proximity to the crown, Christos. The closer the union, the more serene man's destiny, the less dangerous the external conditions. This belief is neither bigotry nor superstition, only an ever-present instinctive feeling of the proximity of another spiritual and invisible world, which, though it be subjective to the senses of the outward man, is perfectly objective to the inner ego. Furthermore, they believe that there are external and internal conditions which affect the determination of our will upon our actions.
This reading comes from the writings of Robert Crosby. Theosophy is the path of knowledge. It was given out in order, among other things, that good motive and wisdom might go hand in hand. If it is remembered that the purpose of life is to learn, and that all is made up of learning, The ordinary duties of everyday existence are seen to be the means by which we learn many things. Do thy duty, by every duty leaving results to the law. Theosophy was once happily stated to be sanctified common sense, and I am glad that you perceive it. The Theosophical movement is greater than any society or organization. The latter are but temporal, changing with the nature and understanding of those who constitute them and influence their policies and ideals. They correspond to our physical bodies, whereas the movement corresponds to the soul. There are many kinds of bodies, and work has to be done in each in accordance with the possibilities afforded by nature. Those who pin their faith on any body are choosing a transitory guiding, a frail support. Most of them are looking for authority. The human weakness that makes priestly domination possible leads to spiritual darkness in the course of time. ULT is a name given to certain principles and ideas. Those who associate themselves with those principles and ideas are attracted and bound by them only, not by their fellows who do likewise, or who refrain, or who cease to consider themselves so bound. The declaration is not a theory, but a carrying out of the spirit of the messengers.
This reading is excerpts from notes to the Bhagavad-Gita. All of us are brought to this study by our own request, made to our higher self, who is Krishna. It does not matter whether he is now consciously aware of having made the request, nor whether it was made as a specific act in this life or in any other precedent one. It was made, and it is to be answered at the right time. Some of us have asked this many times before, in ancient births of ours, in other bodies, and in other lands. Others are making the request now, but it is more than likely, in the case of those who are spurred on to intense effort and longing to know the truth, and to strive for unity with God, that they have put up the petition ages since. We take up the cause over and over, life after life, in experience after experience, never completely defeated if we always look to Krishna, our higher self. All the passing shows of life, whether fraught with disaster or full of fame and glory, are teachers. He who neglects them neglects opportunities which seldom the gods repeat. And the only way to learn from them is through the heart's resignation. For when we become in heart completely poor, we at once are the treasurers and dispersers of enormous riches. The attitude to be assumed, then, is that of doing every act, small and great, trifling or important, because it is before us to do, and is a mere carrying out by us as instruments of the will of that deity who is ourself. This practice is the highest, that which someday we must and will learn to perform. Effacement in the Supreme Spirit is gained by the right-seeing sage, whose sins are exhausted, who hath cut asunder all doubts, whose senses and organs are under control, and who is devoted to the well-being of all creatures. If the last qualification is absent, then he is not a right-seeing sage, and cannot reach union with the Supreme. It must follow, then, that the humblest imitator, everyone who desires to come to that condition, must try to the best of his ability to imitate the sage who has succeeded. And such is the word of the Master. For he says in many places that if we expect to have his help, we must apply ourselves to the work of helping humanity, to the extent of our ability. No more than this is demanded. Krishna says that those who with the eye of spiritual wisdom see that the self is all, begin to reincarnate with that belief ingrained in them. Hitherto they had come back to earth without that single idea, but possessed of many desires and of ideas which separated them from the self. But now they begin to return fully at rest in the self, and working out their long accumulated karma. At last they become a Mahatma or great soul.
The unfaltering allegiance of William Quan Judge to Masters of Wisdom makes him an instrument of service for humanity to build on for ever greater work. Mr. Judge became known as preserver of pure theosophy. He exemplified discipleship in every aspect of his thought and action. The disciple strives to gain critical knowledge and master powers first found in himself and then in the world, only to use them on behalf of the whole of humanity. HPB said that Mr. Judge had been a part of the Great Lodge for eons past, and that he was one of those who, with little devaconic rest, had reincarnated several times in order to carry on the work of the Great Lodge. In the incarnation that we speak of today, his entire heart and soul was dedicated to the work of Theosophy for his 23rd year, from his 23rd year until his death just 21 years later. It was reported that he would read the Bhagavad-Gita and discuss the details, even though he may have been the only one present, at least at first, at the meetings. This he repeatedly did, determined that the Theosophical Society would be successful. Will such as this makes its way through every obstacle. Mr. Judge left us jewels in over 200 publications. Here are some of them. There wasn't enough room on the board to list them all, but it gives an idea of the extensive amount of work he did in the last 10 or so years, 9 or 10 years of his life, I believe. In his musings on the true Theosophist path, he said, "Remember that life is the outcome of the ever-living. If you have come to comprehend a little of the mystery of life and can value its attractions according to their worth, these are no reasons why you should walk forth with solemn countenance to blight the enjoyments of other people. Life to them is as real as the mystery is to you. Their time will come as yours has, so hasten it for them, if you can, by making life brighter, more joyous, better." Mr. Judge was born in Dublin, Ireland, on April 13, 1851. At the age of 7, the attending doctor of sickly William pronounced him dead. But William suddenly revived. His parents discovered that he could read, an ability no one had detected before his illness. And he plunged into serious volumes on mesmerism, phrenology, magic, religion, and philosophy. A frail youth, he and some older boys were at a stream. The other boys swam out to an aisle, and they, knowing he couldn't swim, taunted him. So he plunged in and went over. When water got too deep for him, he would walk along the bottom and jump up, get a little air, and walk along further. And to their absolute amazement, he made it to the other side, and they helped the half-drowned William out of the stream. William's mother, Mary Conn, died in childbirth. Facing hardships, his father, Frederick, moved looking for a better life for his children in New York in 1864. The family settled in Brooklyn, where despite hardship, William Q. Judge attended school. Young William worked in the law offices of George P. Andrews, who was to later become Judge of the Supreme Court of New York. He became a citizen and was admitted to the State Bar of New York. Mr. Judge became known for the duality of his mind, which was both very metaphysical and very practical. He was referred to as the Christ of the legal profession due to his compassion, integrity, conscientiousness, and intelligence. Mr. Judge had a natural fondness for children, which enhanced his pain when his daughter, the only child of his and his wife, died of diphtheria in infancy. He heard of a Russian lady of distinguished birth and rare educational and natural endowments. He met Madame Blavatsky and later recalled, "It was her eye that attracted me, the eye of one whom I must have known in lives long passed away. She looked at me in recognition, and at that first hour, and never since has that look changed. It was as if but the evening before we had parted. It was teacher and pupil, elder brother and younger, both bent on the one single end, but she with the power and the knowledge that belong but to lions and sages." Having seen the lion's glance, the diamond heart of HPB, Mr. Judge spent many evenings learning from her. He later wrote to Damodar Mavalankar that he witnessed materializations of solid objects as well as temporary illusions, the duplication of letters by precipitation, strange sounds, and psychokinetic teleportation of objects from one room to another. But all that paled and grew dim before the glorious hours spent in listening to the words of those illuminated ones who came, often late at night when all was still. There were many indications that led me to believe, he said, others were occupying that body and either watching or instructing us. After a suggestion by HPB, the Theosophical Society was inaugurated on November 17, 1875. Mr. Judge helped HPB prepare Isis Unveiled, if you can see it on camera right here. He suggested the term elemental to indicate centers of force acted upon by conscious agents. The publication of Isis aroused much interest, and many brilliant intellectuals gathered around HPB. When HPB sailed for India in 1878, a void was left in Mr. Judge's life. From 1879 to 1883, Damodar and Mr. Judge exchanged many letters. Damodar's closeness to HPB and the Mahatmas inspired Mr. Judge to live only for Theosophy. Their profound friendship, reverence, and respect for one another is a model of relations between disciples and disciples of the wisdom religion. Mr. Judge arrived in Paris in 1883. He assisted with the initial preparation of the secret doctrine He then went on to lecture as he traveled across India. While there, he also defended HPB against charges that attracted worldwide attention near the time of his arrival at the Theosophical Society headquarters in Adyar. Mr. Judge dealt with the press and others. The press began to accept his articles on theosophy, later articles from other theosophists, and some inquirers became members of the Theosophical Society. In the end, the charges against HPB were proven to have been completely false. Mr. Judge returned to New York via England in November. He set about reorganizing the Theosophical Society in America. In 1886, the American section was formed with Mr. Judge as permanent General Secretary. He gathered willing workers to expand the influence of the movement across the country. Branch societies were established, and Mr. Judge started the Path Journal to give them a continuous flow of spiritual thought. From him flowed a ceaseless stream of brilliant and inspiring teachings. He wrote many of the articles of the Path under various pseudonyms. HPB called the contents of the Path pure Buddhi. In 1888, an epitome of theosophy was published and widely read. What is that one? Don't see it right now, but it's a book about like that. Robert Crosby read it in about 1890 and joined the Boston branch of the Theosophical Society. When Mr. Judge parted after meeting him for the first time, he called back, "Crosby, you are on my list." Mr. Crosby soon became the most energetic worker in the Boston branch. 1888 and 1890 saw publication of the Theosophical Forum, the Yoga Aphorisms of Patanjali, and Echoes from the Orient. The aphorisms are here, the forum is there. The echoes are back on the shelf behind me. Echoes from the Orient, a rendition of the Bhagavad-Gita, and the first series of letters that have helped me over there on the end. Mr. Judge helped in initiating the Oriental Department papers, consisting of translations of Eastern scriptures. In 1893, the Ocean of Theosophy appeared. HPB called on Mr. Judge to help in critical phases of the innermost aspects of the movement. The Theosophical Society elected him vice president in 1890, and the American section, under his guidance and wisdom, prospered. Mr. Judge represented HPB in a suit against the New York Sun's publication of derogatory allegations against HPB. The Sun later concluded that the allegations were without foundation, printed a retraction, and an article by Mr. Judge on HPB's life under the title, The Esoteric She. In 1893, the honored place given to Theosophy at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago was due in great measure to Mr. Judge. Now that HPB had departed, the forces antagonistic to the Theosophical movement rapidly regrouped to focus attention on Mr. Judge. They struck just when Mr. Judge was appreciated most deeply by sincere students of Theosophy. During 1893 and 94, Mr. Judge was charged with abusing the names of masters. Robert Crosby helped to draw up an account of the situation and present it to the 1895 Boston Convention, when the American section became the Autonomous Theosophical Society in America, and Mr. Judge as president. About 20 years before his death, Mr. Judge had been in South America, where HPB said was a branch of the Great Lodge. There he contracted Chagas disease, and he increasingly suffered from that disease. He became weak and had spells of coughing and wheezing to the point where he could not sleep properly or even lie down sometimes. On the morning of March 21, 1896, the Raja that he was suddenly aroused through the weak body that could hardly speak, and out came his unmistakable voice saying, "There should be calmness. Hold fast. Go slow." Mr. Judge then quietly left his body at about 9 a.m. Despite the warnings by Mr. Judge in presenting us with a lifetime of examples of how to work and live for others, as we look within to purify our own thoughts and as we look within to purify our own thoughts and motives for action as we work for others, his absence left his closest lieutenants in confusion. Ask Crosby, Mr. Judge often advised and inquires. He thinks and acts as I do. To Robert Crosby, Theosophy meant masters and their teachings as given out by HPB and WQJ. In 1906, Mr. Crosby laid the foundation for a resurrected society. In 1909, he initiated the United Lodge of Theosophists on the basis originally set out by HPB and in the spirit exemplified by WQJ. However chaotic the circumstances which surrounded them, Mr. Judge nor Mr. Crosby allowed the light of devotion to flicker as they focused on the Mahatmas. Out of its fire arose a vision of the true work and ultimate end of all theosophical endeavor. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood.
This reading is from the writings of William Q. Judge. The way of inward peace is in all things to conform to the pleasure and disposition of the divine will, such as would have all things succeed and come to pass according to their own fancy are not come to know this way, and therefore lead a harsh and bitter life, always restless and out of humor, without treading the way of peace. It was said by one who pretended to teach the mysteries, "It is needful that I have pleasant location and beautiful surroundings." He who is a true theosophist will wait for nothing of the sort, either before teaching or what is first needful, learning. It would perhaps be agreeable, but if the divine inspiration comes only under those conditions, then indeed is the divine afar from the most of us. He can only be a factor for good or teach how to approach the way, who, forgetting his own surroundings, strives to beautify and illumine those of others. The effort must be for the good of others, not the gratifying of our own senses or love for the agreeable or pleasant. If you have obtained true knowledge, it forces you to meet all men not only halfway, but more than that, to seek them. It urges you not to retire, but, seeking contact, to plunge into the misery and sorrow of the world. And with your cheering word, if you have no more, the mystic has little else, strive to lighten the burden for some struggling soul. Quote, "Thou mayest look for silence in tumult, solitude in company, light in darkness, forgetfulness in pressures, vigor in despondency, courage in fear, resistance in temptation, peace in war, and quiet in tribulation." And now for some closing remarks.
This concludes our program for today. We thank you for coming and participating, and now we're going to socialize and open it for fellowship. Yes, we have an outreach program at the Silver Spring Library next Saturday at 1 p.m. So you're all invited to come and participate in discussing karma and reincarnation, universal brotherhood, and how to reach the general public and disseminate this very necessary philosophy for the welfare of humanity. Thank you all.